Yeah, this one movie called Edge of Tomorrow, or yeah. Mm, well, it's certainly made loads of money. You know, interesting concept, but of course, Hollywood didn't come up with this concept. Anyway, no, the thing is that it's very militaristic. I mean, time loops are always interesting, shall we say? Of course, then it depends on how the execution is made, so how the method works out, what happens and such. I mean, obviously, CGI was pretty interesting, but I gotta say, of all the time loops I've ever seen, yeah, a time loop of a certain I mean, the military is already very uh very boringly regimented, and to have that as a time loop, so not only is it boring, you just loop it over and over. You just loop it. I mean, obviously, besides that, I mean, the story, sure enough, is interesting. The point is, it's the how they decided. I'm sure they could have decided to start the loop from somewhere else. I mean, it's just so. And they did repeat a lot of other things as well that they could have done without. I mean, they decided to not loop many other things, but decided to loop some things for some reason, and I'm not entirely sure what the reason is. Yeah. Otherwise, sure enough, as time loops go, it's interesting, but um, it's incredible how popular how it turned out to be. Because I mean, just they I mean, yeah, well, yeah, possibly it has something to do with the fact that they spend 100 million on advertising. That's quite something. I mean, I don't know. They could have spent it and we've still not been popular, and they would have lost 170 million, which is quite something. But somehow they didn't, and it made about double that much. So yeah, it really paid off for big budget films, though. Blockbusters, of course. It's a sort of a risk that there were other blockbusters that didn't quite, like the one when I commented on in the past. I think it was a, big budget film, the heart of the sea. Yeah, I think yeah that was a bomb. So it's interesting, but it's very repetitive. Of course, is the whole point, but and predictable as well, kind of. I mean, quite the most. You know, I noticed the one of the producers also produced The Matrix, and sure enough, the aliens especially reminded me of The Matrix. Doesn't quite though, obviously, Matrix is much more philosophical, etc. This really didn't have much of that at all. I mean, it was like an explanation for 5 minutes, and then a an inevitable romance, somehow it's always going to be there, and of course a kiss. What it wouldn't be a movie without a kiss at the end, right? Eh, so in this sense, it's predictable, regardless of whether it uses an innovative sort of thing in this form of a time. Because obviously, if it was just Hollywood on its own, it would be just people just doing it straight away directly, just trying to defeat whatever they want to defeat directly. No time loops. Although I actually haven't seen how Gold Hog Day sure enough, so I'm not entirely sure. I mean, sure that it originated there, but well, no, I think there were even earlier ones. But anyway, yeah. Um, as sci-fi action goes, though, it's still interesting. I'm not saying it's not interesting in this sense. I mean, sure enough, it's better than just having that, just having a battle or whatever, or even watching a movie about the Normandy landings. They tend to be inevitably more mundane. Obviously, there's no time loops or anything. Um, So in this sense, sure enough, it's interesting. It's just, not exactly the most interesting object to time loop on. It's just one of those things. Just so that's shall we say, the officers were very annoying. The guy, who constantly repeats about redemption or whatever. This is the problem. I mean, just um, they could have repeated something slightly less. I don't know. Then again, yeah, can see where he got the concept from, though. He's a gamer, and of course that's the modus operandi in games. You fail, you respawn, and you try again. It's slightly better skills. Slightly is usually the keyword. Yeah, so it's quite something. Yeah, I apparently a sequel is in the making, but I've decided to watch this now anyway. It's whatever. I mean, sequel's only just being made now anyway. Apparently, just early planning in early 2020 apparently. So probably come out 2022 earliest possibly. Post production usually takes a year or so. Well, I don't know, but with this, yeah, I think it would take possibly. It took around 2 years, so I think for this one to go. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, it's interesting, but it's still very formulaic. That's the problem. It's sort of everything he said, sort of as predictable. I mean, as it's predictable because of the way Hollywood operates. I guess just it does a lot of these. It's not predictable because I went back in time and seeing what happened or something. Uh, how it's predictable because just these things just happen. And I mean, in comparison to something like Aeon Flux, which is also somewhat of an action sci-fi thing. It has similar themes and such, but it is more interesting. It doesn't have a time loop, but it's and that one on the other hand is about reincarnation and such. So it just is more interesting, and visually it's more interesting as well. Just a lot of sand and shooting. It's just not graceful. I don't know. Aeon Flux is full of grace in comparison. Well, it's more about acrobatics, I guess, rather than exoskeletons. But yeah. So yeah, I'm not saying it's uninteresting. It's not, it is interesting. Just not incredibly. As far as sci-fi go, it's certainly not the best I've seen. But in comparison to war movies, just normal war movies, sure, it's better. Most things are better than most more war movies. They tend to be insipid. This is the problem. The problem with this was that it took a lot from those kind of movies. So in a sense, it was also insipid, but it also took sci-fi tropes, and from that vantage point, it was interesting. The visuals were obviously, as I said, also interesting. The CGI was interesting, but in terms of the militaristic aspect, very repetitive, boring. Frankly, slightly surprised critics praised it because it's very by the books, shall we say? Very Hollywood, obviously, and yeah, I mean, I don't know if this came out as anime or even a Japanese movie. I think it would be slightly different, I suppose, but possibly. I mean, kind of like Inception and Paprika and such. Hollywood always puts a lot of guns in it, and there isn't an adaptation that isn't Hollywood, so this is the only thing I have to go on. But it did have loads of guns. It certainly did. That's one thing it did have. And it's just at least she had. At least Emily Blunt had a sword. It was purely Hollywood, that sword wouldn't exist. Nope. But it's still very militaristic. Is the problem. and very as I said, formulaic and such, and try to shove in a romantic thing. It's, yeah,